Good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome to a programme with ourselves, Social Rights Ireland, in conjunction with our comrades, the Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum. We are taking a slightly different approach starting this summer, where we're going to analyse news stories that occur and are reported in mainstream media. And the reason for that is we have a tagline that in our new advertisement this weekend that says, "You've read the news or you've heard the news, now here's the truth." Because as we know, as anti-imperialists know and as anti-capitalists know, mainstream media is a tool for imperialism to create or generate or engineer consent for the imperialist narrative for the ruling class. So today's story is a local one that appeared that happened, an event or an incident that happened over the weekend when a march for Gaza was occurring, and then a counter demo was organised in Scarva. And we're going to look at how that was reported by RTE, which is our national broadcaster in the south of Ireland. So if you bear with me, I'm going to share the article with everybody just in case anybody missed it. I'm going to read it quickly, not to patronise anyone, but I know you can all read. But just to look at the headlines, first of all, it said bloodbath averted at County Down protest, says DUP MP. Then you've got the image of the PSNI below, and it says a bloodbath was averted in the County Down village of Scarva amid a pro-Palestine march and counter-protest, a DUP MP has said. Upper Ban MP Carla Lockhart made the comment as she continues to face criticism over her actions and is accused of being front and centre of a hostile masked mob. Ms Lockhart said that this was utter rubbish and that she was in Scarva with other unionist elected representatives to de-escalate tensions. Hundreds turned out in Scarva on Saturday in opposition to the Great March for Gaza, organised by the IPSC, which was due to pass by on the Newry towpath en route from Lurgan to Newry. There was a heavy police presence which focused on enforcing Parade's Commission conditions of keeping those from the march from entering Scarva and blocked off several bridges in the village. Police resources made available included water cannons and armoured Land Rovers, as well as tactical support group officers. Ms Lockhart criticised the police presence, saying it caused disruption to local residents, did not reduce anxiety and tensions, and blocked off Scarva Bridge, where the counter demo had been planned to take place. A large number of protesters instead staged a demonstration further up the village, close to a new housing development and just across a narrow canal from the march. March organisers have contended they were faced with slurs hurled from an unnotified counter-protest in a field outside Scarva. During events, Ms Lockhart was photographed standing near masked individuals in Scarva as the march passed by. Ms Lockhart told the BBC she was on the ground along with other unionist elected representatives seeking to de-escalate, keep the peace in what was a very volatile situation. She said police had blocked the bridge, which had been the designated area for the counter-protest, which she said immediately made a bad situation worse. Protesters then made their way to the housing development further along the canal. Miss Lockhart said police came in very heavy, and she, along with colleagues, had to intervene, had to de-escalate, had to negotiate with the police, encourage the community, and were able to keep what could have been an absolute bloodbath very quiet, peaceful, and ultimately no incidents. Sinn Féin South Down MP Chris Hazard said from video footage and photographs of events in Scarva, people can see very clearly the actions of Carla on the day, a public representative front and centre of masked men in 2026. He said crowds could be heard intimidating, shouting vile racist sectarian abuse at families who were walking to raise awareness of genocide and to raise funds for children that were dying in Gaza. People can see those events very, very clearly. A public representative who decided to stand and facilitate and to embolden those people that were standing beside her doing that, he said. I think the public were rightly disgusted at the images that came from Scarva on Saturday, and they're completely unacceptable. So it ends with Chris Hazzard, Sinn Féin MP, speaking. So, Tommy, I'm going to take this off screen share, but just to start with the headlines: bloodbath averted. A County Down protest, says DUP MP.
Well, very dramatic, melodramatic headline. Definitely how she can ascertain there was a bloodbath, because unless she had information from those protesting, because they were going to launch an attack on the march for Gaza. Certainly you can take it as read, take it for granted, certainly, that the people marching against genocide in Gaza were not going to attack anybody. So how does Carla Lockhart decide that there's going to be a bloodbath? And the thing about it is that this is fairly typical RTE reporting on the North, using melodramatic language, and really not going into what's happening there at all, because in many ways, Carl Lockhart and the other DUP member and the Ulster Unionist Party member who were there present, had they really been opposed to what is happening, they would have issued a statement. They would have not attended, and made it very plain and clear that any protest or any attack on the march was totally unacceptable and out of order. And the fact that Carol Lockhart is claiming that she was there to diffuse tension is hard to credit from the photographs we've seen of her pointing angrily at those on the parade on the march, which indicates that she was not just there as a bystander or someone there to keep order. And then she, in fact, what you're seeing happening is a craven attempt to win votes, to enhance her electoral profile. There is at the moment the usual pressure on the largest unionist party to move further to the right. Something that's happening in the North for several decades. Also, Unionist Party outmanoeuvred by the DUP under Union Paisley, and now the DUP finds itself being outmanoeuvred on the right again by the TUV under Jim Allister. So the DUP now is moving to become even more hardline than ever, and that's basically the reason why Carla Lockhart and the other DUP member was there with the Ulster Unionist Party member now. We could speculate what the Ulster Unionists are doing there, because there's a possibility now that the Ulster Unionists are trying to affiliate with the DUP under their new leader. They're removing what are allegedly moderate members of the Ulster Unionist Party's MLAs now. Moderate is a word that I think we take it within inverted commas, but certainly they're moving for a harder line, and I personally suspect that the Ulster Unionists are contemplating melting into the DUP to restore their first ministership, if that's possible. But the thing about this is that it's indicative of the North for so many years, that we're seeing the impact of imperialism playing its nasty hand once again in the 6 counties, where members of the unionist community have been misled and befuddled for generations into believing that they're victims of a conspiracy, when effectively they have been the victims of imperialism. Support for Israel is tantamount to support for imperialism. Now, they tend to liken or draw similarities between the Israelis, what's known as settlers, but I still tend to call them Israeli planters, because it's reminiscent, identical to what happened here with the plantation. And these similarities are being highlighted among the far right within the unionist establishment, subliminally, possibly not maybe so often in public, but certainly in the quiet back rooms. These comparisons are being drawn, told about the fact that the Israeli Zionists are under siege, constantly under siege from surrounding areas, and saying, look, we are under siege ourselves from the hordes of Roman Catholics. Yes. like to describe so many people that are not even many of us not even practicing, but that's beside the point. It's sectarian only to the extent that it's not sectarian at all. There's no dispute over theology here. The dispute is over democracy and democratic rights, and it's a manifestation of at least one community which understands and has for centuries understood the outworking of imperialism, settler colonialism, which was a plantation here in Ulster a few centuries ago. Something similar happening since the days of the Nakba in Palestine. And they have recruited those, let me use the words advisedly, but those bigots of the far right within unionism to protest on behalf of imperialism, to fly the flag of Zionism. It's not just wrong, but it's heartbreaking to see people like that being misused and deluded and taken into this territory. And effectively, people such as Carla Lockhart and others should clearly know better than to do that. Instead, they're availing of the prejudices that have been built up for centuries to spin this credible story about victimization and losing rights, whatnot, and possibly too. We're seeing what's happening now. There's a fear of demographic change, which we're seeing happening. And it's not only happened in Scarva, which was the legendary scene of the mock battle on the 13th of July, but also we're seeing the same. I read one page this morning in the Irish News, 3 incidents. One, Indian gentleman's premises burnt out in the Shankill Road because he was going to open up a supermarket. In Moygashan, County Tyrone, a banner threatening the Muslim population had been replaced after it was removed by the police. And then we had to read about Scarva as well. So this isn't just an isolated incident, it's not a one-off incident. There's a trend now running through the unionist community, which is very disturbing and very worrying and sad in so many ways, because human beings are human beings the world over. They're being misled and misdirected instead of being put on the correct path, told that we're all the same, that it's the working class that are being divided. That's largely the reason behind the division that has been artificially created for centuries in the northern part of Ireland between two religions. It's nothing to do with theology. It's a cruel implementation of imperialism and capitalism, where the working class is divided and kept separated. And as I said, it's both annoying, disturbing, and very heartbreaking to see it happening.
Thank you, Tommy. I think you've covered quite a lot very succinctly there, but and looked at, I suppose, whose interests do incidents like these serve, and it's clearly the Zionist interests and the imperialist interests, and even looking at how a supposed leader, our elected representative was supposed to, or was presenting herself as some kind of intermediary who was going to keep the peace. But as you said, to look at what could she have done differently, and if she was really serious about objecting to this, or making sure that there was no escalation, she should have put out a call at the beginning with her fellow colleagues. So she's clearly capitalised, and not just this particular MP, the others have capitalised on this situation, and the only interests that are being served are not those who were being used as well on the bridge or wherever in the field, but the interests of the British Empire, I suppose, first and foremost, or perfidious Albion, as you often refer to it, Tommy, as well. What do you think, Tommy, are the potential implications
Well,
of this?
it's the same sad situation here in the 6 counties that nothing is going to change until there's dramatic change. And the prospects are that it's going to reinforce the mindset of the violent sector within loyalism or unionism. It's not, and I don't even like to use the word loyalism because sometimes it's a pejorative term used by the establishment to describe the unionists. But it's the hardline unionists that are willing to resort to force. They're always all willing to resort to force, but I'm talking about outside the parameters of the state. But it's going to reinforce their view that they're being victimized, that things are sliding away from them. In some ways, this almost echoes the old story back in the 60s when the militant unionism was reinvigorated in order to contain Captain Terence O'Neill, who was only a mellow, who had no very little intention of fundamentally changing the balance of power, but was prepared to make a few concessions for cosmetic reasons. At present, there's cosmetic changes happening in the 6 counties, hardly fundamental, but there is the risk that this could possibly boil over. I hope it won't, but it possibly could, because the thing is, we're again seeing what has been described again in the Irish news this morning as Paisleyite DNA. The old rascal, the old venomous person stirred up so much hatred that it tended to justify or create never justified, but it created a milieu where mindset was tolerable to attack. And I think this thing again, we're seeing the DUP, the party of Ian Paisley, the creation of Ian Paisley, again emerging to advance its political agenda through telling lies, right?
Lies.
Because there's no justification for what's happening. And to convince their followers that a demonstration on behalf of the poor, unfortunate, tragic people in Gaza, Palestinian people, a march that was to highlight their plight, to raise some support and funds for them. Instead of applauding it, they attack it as some sort of affront. And I see even somewhere that Cara Lockhart even confused the Irish Palestinians Support Committee with the IRSP. That's how little she knows. Accusing the Irish Palestinian Support Committee as being a front for the INLA, which means obviously she confused the two with the IRSP. Now, I mean, it indicates one or two things. Either the woman is completely ignorant of the situation, or it was deliberately, maliciously mixing the two up. Now, we can't accuse someone of doing wrong until we're sure of it, but certainly it was at least it indicates an ignorance of the situation, which is alarming. And it's creating, I've seen, it's not just an isolated incident, as I said, Scarva wasn't an isolated incident. We're seeing something similar happening in Magashel, which is a home. We know of some of the most extreme members of the loyalist community in the past, Shankill Road. These incidents are building up and being validated effectively by political unionism.
And Tommy, I'm conscious that many of those who are in attendance here live tonight are living down south, and many wouldn't have the lived experiences even that we have of growing up in the north. So, and there's still quite often amongst, particularly, I suppose, the liberal population, that there's peace, and the Good Friday Agreement was a good thing, and it brought peace and things have settled down. What does this indicate about? Well, we would see the peace process as a failure anyway when you look at the decline of society, when you look at the rise of homelessness, when you look at the slow violence and the invisible violence in the north, and how, that's not peace at all. But, some people say, oh, will this jeopardize the peace process? Or are we starting to see a return to the old days? Like, how would you respond to that, Tommy?
Well, I think we've got to be careful about talking about the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement didn't settle or solve any of our real problems. And that's not to say that the idea that we ended, to a large extent, the shooting, that we can't at least admit that there's enormous value for the civilian and population of the 6 counties. There has been a few tragic incidents which would be chauvinistic to condemn that for its value, but the Good Friday Agreement itself didn't address the issues of which you talk. Unemployment, we're talking about good jobs bill that DUP are refusing to endorse. Homelessness is an issue, high rents, cost of living, and the education system is becoming more expensive, plus the health service is collapsing day and daily. What used to be the pride of Britain, the National Health Service, is in the 6 counties now. It's not only worse than Britain, but it's worse than what even we have in the 26 counties. Any type of elective surgery has to be paid for effectively unless you want to wait until you're either blind or crippled. So the health service has gone in privatised at a huge rate. All of that is heartbreaking, it's cruelty. And the point about all of this is that the history indicates that there is a great potential for unifying the working class. We've done it 1798, 1907, 1919, 1936, the Outdoor Relief Act. And that's the reason why there's a concerted effort to separate, to keep people apart, that otherwise the beneficiaries would lose out to a unified people. Because I have, actually spoken often to many members of the Unionist Loyalist community. From my time inside, I met several of them, and they're people that, they're like human beings. Everyone that's given it half a chance, they would certainly support a beneficial movement for the people, but misled and misguided. They will, unfortunately, it is the risk that we're talking about. A flare-up similar to the mid-60s.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tommy. And I suppose misled and misguided and confused and waylaid, all of that doesn't happen accidentally. And that's why it's important to, that's why we're sort of shifting the way that we carry out this program every Monday, where we're looking at how actually mainstream media creates the conditions for, make normalizing these stories in such a sensational way, in such a dramatic way too, because obviously sensationalism is what sells. Peace doesn't. Peace stories of, calm and peace and stability don't make the news. So drama is required to create further drama. At this point, I might invite, before I do stop recording, I might invite one or two people to ask a question or to make a comment if they'd like to come in. Perhaps someone who.
Okay, can I just ask? So this is there's quite a significant number of people there. So they weren't all residents of Scarva, for one thing, as Carla Lockhart was implying when she was speaking on TV. I've actually met Carla Lockhart a few times because of work-related things. Not a nice person. But is this some racism? Using pro-Zionism, a wide-scale thing. I mean, the demonstrations that are going on throughout the country in support of the people of Palestine? Are they regularly and extensively intimidated by similar demonstrations? Is there a movement across Northern Ireland, following what was demonstrated in Scarva, or is it something that's at an early stage and growing? And I suppose one of the things that I thought is that I met a few people recently who've totally, I mean, we're supposed to be all aware of this, totally confused the issue of, who just cannot seem to understand Zionism and Jewishness. It's two different things. There's just a bizarre amount of ignorance. I mean, a classic thing was, you saw Boy George talking about why he wasn't opposed to Israel in the Eurovision Song Contest. He just completely confused the whole thing. But a slogan around saying support Jews, denounce Zionism, or something, which would make people sit up and think, how can you do that? Are these two things separate? Does that try and create a bit more momentum than we have in our society to divide the two things, to some sort of shocking term that would help people sit up? Just a suggestion, thought, maybe better wording.
That's fair enough, Alan. I think that I don't think that this is unique to the North. I mean, we've seen maybe not incidents as big as Scarva, but we're seeing racism, manifest itself on the streets. For example, we had the pro-monarchists, for Iran on the streets of Dublin several weekends, several Saturdays in a row. So this pro-Zionist, very much pro-Zionist, and it's not that they're saying that they're trying to defend Judaism. It's nothing to do with, even Judaism. It's defending Zionism. That and the other thing is that I suppose we need to remember that Zionism isn't, there are Christian Zionists, there are atheist Zionists as well, that Zionism isn't a religion, it's an ideology that needs to be taken into account. But the confusion and the ignorance is not accidental either. I think it boils down to how mainstream media does such a good job at confusing people and riling up people and dividing people. It's just a tool of imperialism. I don't know, Tommy, like would you know of more, or anybody else in the North know of more examples like this particular incident where a counter demo was called and was organised? The other racist incidents were probably done under under darkness and not known, whereas these people came out en masse. According to that news item, there were hundreds, and maybe others here could verify how many, but it seems like a pretty well organised and a large, it's not just a few Egypts.
No, because from the word go, I remember several at the start of the campaign to support the people of Gaza, large marches in Belfast, and would head off from in front of the university out to the US Embassy. And halfway up the road, there was a loyalists picketing, showing their distaste, flying Israeli flags. So it's nothing new, this. And my experience is that within the militant loyalism, there's been a fondness for the Israeli Zionist project from as long as I've known them, certainly 30, 40 years. It's nothing new.
No, it's not, because even where I come from, in the estates in the town where I originally come from, there'd always have been, in the Unionist estates, Israeli flags, and there would always have been Palestine flags in the Nationalist Republican areas. So there was, I thought, I considered that maybe sectarianism, but you're talking today, Tommy, more about that this is racism manifesting itself, but this attachment of just not even understanding why we support Zionist Israel, or maybe even on the opposite side, not fully I think nowadays we fully, but I know growing up, I didn't. I just knew we were for Palestine, and I knew they were oppressed people. Didn't fully understand, and they were fighting against imperialism as well. So there was a bond there between us, between the Irish people and the Palestinian people. You wonder to what extent, actually, and who's going to where is the leadership in particular in the north? Who is going to lead? Like, where is James Connolly today, who was able to talk, bridge the sectarian or more racist now tendencies, and bring people together on the basis of class and our working class interests? That's more of a rhetorical question, Tommy, not to put you under pressure, because I see Patricia, you have your hand up. You might want to come in, and then if you want to come back, Tommy. Patricia.
Yes, I just want to say, Tommy, that analysis is just top class. And I was on the march on Saturday. Now, I didn't do the Scarva part, but I kept in contact with people who were doing it. And we met, I joined at Jarrett's Pass. We walked, about 10 miles into Newry. And I met up with people who had been there, and some the comments and the vile comments, and it was pure racism, and they aimed at the people of colour on the march. And I was really impressed with the dignity of our people who didn't respond to it. But I mean, I think it was 2 years ago, the people from Coolock joined the UDA in Belfast, and there was counter demonstrations at the City Hall. Now, I was on those gatherings, for the want of a better term, rallies. And I remember the Coolock crowd came up with tricolours, and was so, we couldn't believe that the UDA were actually flying the tricolour. So what we're seeing is a real rise of fascism. And I do believe that, I think we need to look at who is organising this, because they're trying to make it out. I saw a poster where it was counter the Republican pro-Palestinian protesters. So they're sort of trying to make this like it's an anti-Republican demonstration. And not, we had people from all walks of life on that protest on Saturday. What they call is like a cross community. We had people of all denominations on that march on Saturday. We had Muslims, we had people from the Presbyterian Church on it. And I mean, it was just ridiculous. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Patricia. I think it is important, because to distinguish the difference between the institutions, the racism or structural racism, that, when people say, like you say, it's vile, Patricia, to be a witness to it as well, and to hear those words. But they just don't come, this just doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's always a context, there's always a background, and there's always these institutions that are in the background creating these divisions and divide and conquer. And those institutions are, even they look so innocuous. If you look at education, if you look at academia, if you look at the EU, for example, it's very easy, or it's much easier to point the finger at an individual and call them a racist or a fascist. And while we're doing that, we miss the institution that has created these conditions. Like, very few, still there's like a huge reticence to criticize the EU for its racism. Look at the EU Migration and Asylum Pact, and look at how it is so pro-NATO as well, that if you align with the NATO narrative, you'll be very welcome here, but if you don't, you'll be deported. And then how that feeds the fear of the other, and how it feeds and creates racism at a lower level. So the fact that the people, like you say, Patricia, who were on the march remained dignified, but it's very hard. It is very hard, because I have been in the presence of many, many people who are not originally from Ireland and who are not white, who are, who are noticeably non-Irish, and to see them spat at, derided, abused, attacked as well. It's very hard not to react or respond. And those who can maintain their dignity, will often say, this didn't come. These people they're not born this way. They're taught to behave in this way. They're taught to fear the other and to hate the other, and to not see, as you said, Tommy, our human likeness, that we are all humans, rather than Irish, British, English, French, Afghani, Palestinian, or whatever. We are all human at the end of the day. Deirdre, you've your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Yes, just to confirm what Patricia said, everybody at Scarva, and I wasn't at Scarva, but I was at the Sluice Cottage in Acton, and then I went into Newry, and we had a Christian choir that come to a lot of our pro-Palestinian demonstrations, and they are just the most fantastic people. And, it was such a broad church on Saturday of people right across the board from every community. And yes, you're right about the institutions, but I think here in the north, a lot of people from the other tradition, and including our own Catholic Church, you're brought up listening about Israel and the Israelites, and this is talked about at Mass and sermons. So when you're listening to this from a young child, and I think more so in the other tradition with the Christian Zionist sort of flavour that comes across, I mean, they're completely brainwashed. It is a cult. And, the people on that march from all traditions that have removed themselves from that sort of thinking and racism, they were just so brilliant, and it was just such a brilliant day. Peaceful, dignified, joyful, and a real family occasion. But that has not been reflected in the media. When I tuned in today to those, well, I don't know what to call them, none of that was reflected today when you listened. And that is such a shame.
Thank you, Deirdre. And like we said at the beginning, the mainstream media is not going to tell us the good news story. It'll always capitalize and find that little thing to sensationalize, not to undermine. I'm not dismissing the significance of it, and that it is important to record that and to analyze it too. But the headlines in particular, especially from RTE, were really, really, it's unnecessary and provocative. Owen, would you like to come in? You have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. You can hear me okay, yeah?
Yes, you're welcome here,
Right.
Owen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I just really had an anecdote there, just on the topic of, generously maybe more right-wing Irish Republicans taking on kind of Zionist positions, or perhaps anti-Palestinian positions. It does happen. Kulak was an example, but even where I'm from now would be Clonmel, County Tipperary. Somewhat progressive element, but quite reserved. Generally, people don't like raising their voices. But we have a Palestinian vigil there every Saturday, and just this Saturday past, there was a fella drove by and stuck his head out the window, middle of a town, so traffic was going quite slow. He had a bit of time to shout some remarkable sentences that I won't repeat here, but you could imagine the type of crap he'd be saying. And then he finished it by saying "up the ra," and I was quite baffled by that. But as baffled as I was, I think he was quite bemused to see half of us shouting it straight back at him. Um, there's my read on it is that these kind of as I say, right-wing Irish Republicans, uh, there's no real principle behind it. They're just frustrated and noise. These are often people subjected to cruel social conditions and just lashing out. And it's just an example of the media and right-wing agitators and so on affecting them. But I think that's what we need to remember is that most of these people, they're not ideologically committed to their positions. They're not uh, fixed in any way. They're just frustrated, angry people. And I just thought I'd share that anecdote as well. And yeah, thanks by the way for letting me speak. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
Thank you, Owen. I think that's an important point to make. Especially we've seen a lot of that too here. Owen, just this random, even kids, saying anything to disturb or disrupt or whatever. And I think the last thing in a situation like that we should do is point the finger and call them a Zionist and rev them up even more. That if you're really serious about de-escalating, then there would be dialogue, there would be discussion, there would be respect. But it would be very hard. Tommy, I'm going to come back to you. Like when this was such an organized counter demo, and like Alan said, surely those people weren't all from Scarva, so it was very orchestrated. What kind of leadership is needed, Tommy, now? So how do we deal if we are to meet with this or to be confronted with these scenes again, whether it's north or south or whatever? How should we? Do we continue to always be dignified and walk peacefully by? Like at what point do we resist people deliberately flying the fascist flags in our faces and provoking us? At what point do we say no?
Well, I think we'll be very careful about talking about attacking. Defense is one thing, but attack is something else, not to launch an attack. The point about it is that from the earliest manifestation of imperialism, the rule of thumb they've used is divide, conquer, and thereafter rule. And that goes right to today. What's happening is divide, conquer, and rule. And I mean, it was a few centuries ago, as a man talked about uniting Catholic, Protestant, and dissenter, substituting the name of Catholic, Protestant, and dissenter for common name of Irish. It's been a long time we've had this problem, a long time we're dealing with it. I think we've got to stand our ground and just continue to preach the message, if that's not a risky
Verb.
term to use. Look, we've got to stand our ground. We've got to keep on pushing the message out that there's a better way to live life. There's a better methodology. There's a better way to organize society. And that at the end of the day, we're talking about two things. One, there's the organization behind these unfortunates that spout this. And they could possibly at some stage energize them or mobilize them into an attack, at which stage then we've got to talk of defense. But listen, I think it's too early to talk about that. We've got to keep on spreading the news that there's a better way of life, that what they're saying is wrong. We've got to highlight every opportunity we get to highlight the fundamental message that humanity is only, as I heard it said, there's only one race on this earth, and that's the human race. And that racism, sectarianism, religion, imperialism has used every method of separating and splitting and dividing. In Ireland, they used religion. In the United States, they used race. In somewhere else, come up with colour. It's what happens. But we've got to come up with opposite theory and practice, that there's only one race, we're all the same human race, and that there's a better way of organizing society than capitalist imperialism. Imperialism being the highest form of capitalism, as we've been told by Vladimir Lenin, which is true. Hopefully now we're in the last phase of capitalism, but we've got to resist it, and we've got to talk about it. We've got to highlight and stay the ground we're on. And episodes like this here, what you're doing this evening, Roisin, continue to do it, and try as best we can. If it's possible, to build a broad front. Now, I know that there's legendary difficulties on the left, but notwithstanding that, we've got to keep pushing the case that we've more in common than we have to separate us. We can have all the disputes and differences and arguments we like about different aspects of the left, but we've got to continue to advocate the case as the capitalism and imperialism is the enemy, and that as has been said in the past, that the axis of history always turns towards justice in the long run. That we will in the long run triumph.
Well, on that good note, we will in the long run triumph. We will end the recording now, because that's a positive message, despite the negative narrative that we started off with from RTE, Radio Telefi Sharon. So from this Telefi Sharon in my wee sitting room, I'll say slán go fóill to everybody. If you'd like to stay on for 5 or 10 minutes, you're very welcome. But after that, remember, we'll be back next Monday, and after you hear the news, come to us to hear the truth. Slán go fóill.
Slán.